All right. Hello and welcome to our webinar, our WiLSWorld short, talking about digital preservation advocacy. My name is Emily Pfotenhauer, and I am the program manager for Recollection, Wisconsin, which is our statewide digital collection and a service hub for the Digital Public Library of America. And I am here with my colleague, Vicki Tobias. I'll let Vicki introduce herself.
Hi folks, I'm Vicki Tobias and I'm the program coordinator for Curating Community Digital Collections and also a member of the digital projects team for WiLS. And we're really excited to be here with you today and share with you some of our ideas about digital preservation advocacy.
All right, thanks. So I had a few housekeeping details to look at before we get started. So we have a lot of folks on the line today. So please use the chat box for questions. You're welcome to add questions at any point as we go through the session. If we've got the time, we'll try to pause and answer as the questions come in, but we might have to hold your question until the end. But please feel free to use chat to add your questions as you've got them, and we'll make sure we address them by the end of the session today. Please also, if you're calling in, make sure your audio is muted. Most of you will be muted already if you're joining over the web, but if you're on the phone, please make sure you can mute yourself. The session is being recorded, and you can look for an email with a link to the recording, as well as the slides we'll be sharing today and a resource list with links to some of the resources we'll be talking about today. Those will all be shared with you after the session is done. So let's go ahead and get started. A little bit of an overview of what we're talking about today. This is actually the second in a series of 3 webinars that WiLS is offering this year, centered on techniques and strategies for different kinds of advocacy. Back in February, we heard from Connie Meyer and Scott Vrees about advocating for your library to state and local governments. And on November 8th, our 3rd advocacy webinar will address advocating for diversified collections in your library. And today we're talking about advocacy for digital preservation. So we wanted to introduce some tools, some language, and some strategies that you can use to make the case at your institution for making an ongoing commitment to preserving your digital resources. So this session is not about how to do digital preservation. It's how to talk about the need for digital preservation to your administrators, or your board, or your IT department if you have one, as well as any partners who might be contributing to the digital content to your collections, like faculty, donors, volunteers, or other partners. And we have a really broad range of institution types on the session today: public libraries and public library systems, academic libraries, archives and museums, and government agencies. And we know that each of these domains will have some specific language that resonates best for you, but we wanted to offer some broad general definitions that you can adapt and make them more relevant for your own work and your own location. Sorry, I just saw a note that my audio is being a little weird. Let me know if you're having a hard time hearing me. And also just a reminder to mute yourself if you're not already. So let's see. So in addition to some language that we want to kind of add to your toolkit, we want to give you some tools that you can add to your toolkit that'll help you lay the groundwork for effective advocacy. And then we'll be giving you some examples and case studies of how to have the talk, the digital preservation talk, with some common stakeholder groups. And a lot of the resources and examples that we'll be sharing today build on our experience, Vicki's experience and my experience over the past 2 years, working on a project called Curating Community Digital Collections, or CCDC. This is an IMLS-funded initiative we've been working on for the last 2 years, where we work with smaller libraries and archives and historical societies around the state and paired them up with graduate students from the iSchools at UW-Madison and UW-Milwaukee to work on developing digital preservation policies and other digital preservation planning activity. So a lot of what we'll be referring to today is from our CC. All right, so starting with some definitions. And the most basic definition, what do we mean by preservation? This definition here comes from the Northeast Document Conservation Center, and it's one that I like because it's format agnostic. It can be relevant for both analog collections and digital collections. And according to this definition, the primary goal of preservation is to prolong the existence of cultural property. And then the unspoken goal here is access. So why are we prolonging the existence of cultural property? It's so it can be accessed, so it can be viewed, used, understood by current and future users, researchers, students, readers, patrons, visitors. And another definition, so then if that's preservation, similarly, digital preservation is that set of activities that minimize loss or damage and protect information for digital content. And kind of the key difference here is this sense of over time. With books or documents, we can read it, we can look at it, we can put it on a shelf, and continue to open it and read it for potentially decades or more with proper handling. But due to the nature of digital content, we can't really expect to set a digital file aside for 50 years, much less 10 years, without more active management. And that's why digital preservation is often talked about as a relay race rather than a marathon. The idea is that you're thinking about active management in cycles of 3 years or 5 years, so that we can pass the baton from one generation of technology to the next. And again, the unstated outcome here is access. We're not doing this for fun or because the standards say we're supposed to. We're doing this digital preservation work so that current and future users can access and understand this digital work. Let's see, yeah, we need someone to mute themselves who just joined. If you can, please mute yourself when you join. All right, so other definitions or other terms to think about. Sometimes it's helpful to think about what digital preservation is not, as well as what it is. And all of you that are here with us today have probably heard this line many times, that digitization is not preservation. But for folks who are not embedded in this kind of work, this is still a really widespread assumption. And you might need to be prepared to explain to your board members or your director, for instance, that just because we scanned it or because it's available online doesn't mean it's going to be around forever. And in fact, the opposite is really true. Digital content is more vulnerable in a lot of different ways. Vicki will talk about some of those risks and vulnerabilities in a moment. But this is a mantra. There's, of course, exceptions to any rule, but keeping in mind the idea that digitization is not digital preservation. Another thing that digital preservation is not, and another common assumption that you might need to be prepared to address when you're having conversations with stakeholders, is that backups are not preservation. Backing up your files is, of course, extremely important. Backups will be part of your active management of digital content over time, but what you store in your backups could be corrupted or the storage media can fail, causing data loss. As technology and software change, data can become technologically inaccessible. So no matter how many backups you've got, it's not going to help if the software to open a given file doesn't exist anymore. And files that are saved on their own might not be findable or usable without some metadata to describe them and to allow us to find them and understand them. And this quote comes from an article by Scott Prater of the UW-Madison Libraries. It's an article available online called How to Talk to IT About Digital Preservation. And this is a really great resource for some language for talking to IT, but really for talking to anyone about the importance of digital preservation work and sort of getting everybody at kind of the same baseline understanding of this work. So another misconception that you might encounter is the idea that digital preservation is all about the technology. We just need to get the right software and then we're all set. But software on its own cannot preserve anything. A repository is the sum of the software, the hardware, the financial resources, the staff time, and the ongoing implementation of policies and planning to ensure long-term access to content. And one way to visualize this balanced management approach is as a three-legged stool. So it's made up of technology, the organization, and the resources. And if one leg of the stool is weaker than the others, or if one leg of the stool isn't there at all, the whole thing can fall over. And this graphic and this concept come out of work by Nancy McGovern and Ann Kenny at Cornell University from around 2003. So this was when sort of field of digital preservation was really kind of early on in its life. And so in this three-legged stool model of balanced management, the idea is that you would address organizational infrastructure, so the policies, the procedures, the practices, and the people to plan and document and carry out the work you're doing. The resources, so the financial resources, both startup resources, ongoing resources, contingency funding to launch the work and to maintain the work, and then the technology infrastructure. So that's the software and hardware, as well as the skills that are necessary to use those software and hardware tools. And this is never static or permanent. It needs to anticipate and respond to changing technology. So I am going to hand things off now to my colleague, Vicki, who's going to share more about the types of digital content we're talking about and some tools for you to use.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, so I think all of this foundation information is really important to review before we jump into the advocacy piece. So what are we talking about here? I want you to think about what are the digitized or born digital files or collections you may be acquiring and from whom. So I'd like you to take a moment and use the chat function in GoToMeeting, if you can, if you're on the web version, and share some of the digital or digitized content that you're either creating, collecting, or planning to collect. And we'll take a moment and see what people are thinking about. Watching chat. What are you digitizing? What are you collecting? I'm going to read some of these and then we'll go back to the chat. And some of these are going to be familiar to you. Some of the most common items might include content resulting from digitization projects, digitized content shared or donated by your community members, born digital archives or records, including your organization's meeting minutes, reports, or other business records, email correspondence, websites, including your own website, and again, institutional records. So I'm not seeing anybody sharing anything with chat. What are you collecting, folks? Or what are you planning to collect? Or what are you digitizing? I know a lot of you have digitized historical collections from your local history collections. So now I'd like you to think about where these digital items originate. Again, you're welcome to use the chat function to share some of your ideas. In general, I think it depends on your institution, but they're originating from your organization's donors. Work created by you or your staff, items created or digitized for projects. They may also originate from the community you serve, including faculty, local government entities, campus or community organizations, etc. I love it. Records of old people, websites and streaming recordings of college events, municipal records that are born digital, photos, websites, emails, scrapbooks, newspaper from microfilm, old photos, yearbooks, digital archives. Yeah, that's great. So many digitized yearbooks in so little time. Next slide. Yeah, so now that we've talked a little bit about what we're talking about, I want you to think about the digital or digitized objects in your collection and what makes them different. Think about the nature of digital files and how they differ from analog formats. Some thoughts that we've talked about over the last couple of years: digital objects are ephemeral by their very nature. They are susceptible to obsolescence as they are entirely dependent on their storage media. They often require documentation to use or understand them. Managing issues such as rights can also be much more difficult, from protecting copyright to ensuring personal data is protected. They also require us to gain new skills to care for them, or for us to work with new groups of colleagues with different skills groups, particularly IT specialists. But on a positive note, they do also bring a whole host of new benefits, including the ability to make this content more widely available and accessible to users. Next slide. All right, so my next question for you, I would like you to think about barriers to digital preservation. Take a moment, think about where you might be stuck on this topic for your organization and what is the impact for your organization. And again, take a moment and share your thoughts in chat. What are some common barriers to digital preservation? Excellent. Staffing and budget, time, long-term storage of digital, Google, Amazon cloud storage, staff and time, cost and staff, content owned by units outside of the library. It's almost as if you know what my next slide is going to say. Next slide, Emily. So right, excellent. Available memory, budget, staffing, these are all excellent answers. I think most institutions or organizations would say a few of these apply to their situation, including time. A couple of people said time, resources, both human and monetary, having internal expertise or the lack of internal expertise, infrastructure, including hardware, software, and storage space, IT support, administrative support, and competing priorities. Yeah, and Mary just added attitude. They're saved on the computer. We don't need to save anything else. Yeah, that's great. Next slide. All right, so we've talked a bit about the what and the why of digital preservation. Emily gave you some excellent definitions, and we've got a good handle on what we're talking about here. Again, I think those issues are important to review so you have good context for your advocacy conversations about digital preservation. So we've got a few tools that we want to share with you today that we hope will support your advocacy work in this area. The first tool is a digital collections inventory. The next tool is a digital preservation policy. And our third tool is actually not a tool, but two resources that facilitate digital preservation assessment and planning, the process of which I think can promote digital preservation within your organization. All right, so as I said, the first tool that we want to talk about is a digital collections inventory. In my opinion, you have to know what you have before you can advocate for or embark on digital preservation work. Digital collection inventories are a little different than other types of catalogs or collection inventories. They contain information about collections of all types from across your organization, not only archival collections. They describe born digital and digitized collections at the collection level, not the item level, and that's very important. The collection level, not the item level. They document and manage collection level preservation and assessment information, and they can also be used to track and prioritize digital collections through a preservation workflow. So think in terms of groups or collections of content. Examples of types of digital collections might include digitization projects, oral histories, born digital collections donated by community members, born digital business records, or collections based on format, including audio and video collections. Some of the key fields in your inventory should include collection title, collection creator, key dates, information about file formats, the physical location of this collection, the inventory creator information, and finally, something we call a data criticality scale. So what is a data criticality scale? It's a field in your inventory where you document and rank a collection's preservation risk. And this is very important. You're documenting a collection's preservation risk. So for example, a born digital oral history might be ranked 1 because it's digital and you hold the only copy. So if you lose it, it's gone forever. Whereas a digitized college yearbook, which many of you have, might be ranked 5. You have a digital copy, you still hold a physical item, and there might be multiple copies dispersed across multiple libraries. So as you can see, a data criticality scale will help you decide which collections to preserve first and at what level of preservation activity. It also can help you allocate your resources more effectively. So I encourage you to think about your digitized or born digital collections and where they might fall on this data criticality scale. And finally, here's an example of an inventory template we shared in Curating Community Digital Collections over the last 2 years. A few thoughts about creating a digital collections inventory. Keep it simple. An Excel spreadsheet works just fine. In my opinion, over complexity leads to underutilization. Think about how you will report out of this inventory spreadsheet. Ultimately, this inventory can help you in your advocacy work by providing basic, up-to-date information about your digital collections at the collection level. For example, if you're working with a vendor to assess storage solutions, you'll need to know exactly how much storage you need. So understanding how many files you have and their file size is going to be important, and this kind of information will be documented in your inventory. So we will actually make available our digital collections inventory template on the resources page that Emily mentioned after this presentation. Excuse me. All right, so let's take a moment to talk about policies, specifically a digital preservation policy as an advocacy tool. So consider creating a digital preservation policy or a set of guidelines. You can call it whatever you want, and use this as an opportunity to advocate for digital preservation. The creation process itself can be helpful in advocating for digital preservation work. The process of information gathering and documentation and the conversations and the decision making that happens around that can help build support and buy-in from your staff and stakeholders. Having a digital preservation policy can help an organization by raising awareness of and informing education or advocacy opportunities related to this work. It creates an environment of trust and credibility for your organization. It facilitates decision-making on many levels within your organization and with your administration. It can improve administrative or leadership understanding of this work. It can raise community awareness of your digital collections development work, which in turn may lead to more born digital or digitized acquisitions or digitization projects. Finally, a good digital preservation policy can assist in your outreach efforts, especially to outreach to financial donors by giving them something concrete to support. And much with, as with the inventory template, we'll make available our digital preservation policy template in your resources page. And finally, our next 2 tools are resources that facilitate planning and decision-making around digital preservation work. They are the NEDCC Digital Preservation Peer Assessment and the NDSA Levels of Digital Preservation. Some of you here today may be familiar with these resources already. Again, much like the digital preservation policy and policy making process, Working through these resources as a team, I think, can help staff and key stakeholders better understand digital preservation work and the priorities involved in that work. So again, the process of working through these resources can promote advocacy for digital preservation. So the first resource is the Digital Preservation Peer Assessment, which was created by the Northeast Document Conservation Center. This assessment template provides excellent questions to prompt staff to think critically about digital preservation activities. The goal of the assessment is to help institutions document digital preservation successes, recognize areas that need further growth, and identify challenges that stand in the way of that growth. It can also help an institution prioritize next steps for improved long-term access to digital preservation, or long-term access to digital collections with a digital preservation plan. This peer assessment can be used by institutions at any phase of their digital preservation efforts, whether you are just starting to consider preserving digital assets or whether you've been undertaking this activity for many years. It's geared to help staff investigate and advance a program really at any stage of their development. So I encourage you to take a look at this document as well. And our next resource is a set of digital preservation guidelines put forth by the NDSA, or the National Digital Stewardship Alliance. So there are a lot of standards and best practices out there related to digital preservation, but we really like the NDSA levels of digital preservation as both an education and an advocacy tool. You can use this as a roadmap to define your work and plan for projects, grants, and advocacy work. I really like it because it gives you some very simple and digestible language that you can plug into different documents as needed. There are 5 functional areas within this document with 4 levels within each of those areas, and they address things like storage, file integrity, information security, file formats, and metadata. It's presented in a grid format, which I really like. I think it makes it easy to use as a guide for planning work and making decisions and goal setting, all sorts of things. You can start with level 1 and go from there. You can also use this tool to talk about gaps or do a gap analysis within your organization, gap analysis with your key stakeholders or administration. Another thing to consider, much like with the peer assessment, many of you are probably at different levels of digital preservation for some of these different categories, and that's okay. You don't have to achieve all of these levels or goals at one time. So again, take a look at this tool and think about how you might use it in your own advocacy conversations and digital preservation work decision-making. All right, so what happens if we don't preserve? Not everyone has this figured out. Even large corporations may have challenges dealing with digital preservation, including something like Disney Pixar Studios. And it's not just about technology challenges and administrative buy-in, but sometimes human error and human solutions play a key factor. So we have a short cautionary tale we'd like to share with you.
And an ad, sorry about that. I'm sorry, I'm having a technical difficulty. Were folks not able to hear the audio with that? right, let's see. I'm going to need to pause my screen share for just a minute. Sorry about this. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm sorry, Vicki. I'm not able to get the audio to work on my end. You, sorry about that. Would you like to describe the upshot of this, I guess?
Yeah, so I can provide a brief summary. So this is and I encourage you to take a look at this video after the presentation today. I think we also included the URL on the resources list. But in short, Disney Pixar Studios actually lost their only copy of Toy Story 2. They had a system, their servers broke down, then their backup failed, and it was only because one of their staff had taken a copy home on a laptop because she was on maternity leave and she was going to be working on the film from home, that they were able to restore the film. And so it's a really cute but also cautionary tale, you know, about storage and backups, and you know, even folks like Disney Pixar, you know, have a snafu now and then. So when you step away from this presentation today, I would encourage you, it's short, it's 2 minutes, it's fun to watch, and it will actually make you feel better about your own institutional efforts and challenges.
All right, thanks. And sorry again about the technical difficulties. This is Emily again, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of some ideas and suggestions for having these conversations with some different key stakeholder groups. So, how do you talk about this digital preservation conversation to different audiences? The ideas and the concepts that you're working with are the same, but the language that you might be using to advocate to these different bodies is going to need to be modified to sort of meet people where they are and help them best understand your ideas and concerns and needs through the lens that they're coming at this from. So thinking about who the key stakeholders might be within your organization and maybe outside your organization, you might find yourself advocating for support for digital preservation with some of the following groups. This is obviously not a comprehensive list, but these are three big groups that we've identified as common to lots of different institution types. So there's your administration, your library director, or your board of directors. Those are the folks who control the money, who make decisions for your institution, and they may possibly also need to review or vet any policies that you are proposing or adopting. Your content creators or contributors. So this is going to include anyone who might be sending digital content your way for possible preservation. At an academic library, that might mean some different departments or individual faculty members. At a museum, it could mean your curators or your exhibit designers. At a public library, it might be local government entities, your own staff working on digital projects, or community organizations or community volunteers. And then a third stakeholder group is IT. You may or may not actually have IT staff within your organization. If you do, you might have systems administrators or general IT support. If you don't, you might have IT support in another source, like your public library system, if you're at a public library, or even an outside service provider. So some general advocacy tips for talking to any of these groups and having a conversation with any of these stakeholders is to tell a story, sort of focus on the results. Find examples or case studies that resonate with your particular audience. So you might focus on issues of risk management and loss. So if we don't start this work now, what could happen? So that Toy Story example that we partially showed you and that we encourage you to watch is a great example of without thorough planning and sort of some precautionary measures, the potential for losing an entire huge amount of lots of people's work. You could focus on what's at stake if we don't do this preservation work. So thinking back to the data criticality scale that Vicki talked about, what would be your damage to the reputation, to your organization's reputation in your community if you lost content? Or you might talk about it from a business case perspective, talking about the resources that have already been invested in building your digital collections and the business case to protect that investment, just like you would any other asset within your organization, like your physical collections or your building. And again, try to meet folks where they are, use language and scenarios that are relatable, try to avoid jargon. There's certainly a lot of jargon in this field, so try to keep your language simple if you can, and be patient. This may be the first time that this audience has had to really delve into this topic, so it may be a new thing that they're looking at. And what you're really building here is a relationship between these parties, between your organization and these other stakeholders. You're not just trying to find a specific solution to a specific digital preservation problem. This is actually an opportunity to solve these new interesting challenges together. So approaching this in the spirit of mutual respect, understanding that these are partners and colleagues that have skills and experience in their own areas. You're not the expert bringing them demands, but you're working together to make this work is a really important thing to keep in mind. So talking to some different stakeholder groups, we'll start with administration. So this might mean your library director, your library board, your board of directors. So starting with some basic definitions of what this is and why we need it, why it's coming up now. This might be a chance where you can share some examples of worst case scenarios, maybe from your organization or maybe from some similar organizations, to sort of illustrate the sort of immediacy of this problem. And coming at this by emphasizing kind of the bottom line. So digital preservation as a risk management activity. We're making the business case. We want to protect our investments and assets that we've created or collected. And we want to protect the institution's reputation. So one way to do this, as Vicki talked earlier, is to develop or begin developing a digital preservation policy to share with your administration. And you can compare this in a sense to an insurance policy, that this is your insurance policy for digitized or digital collections. This is something that, language that administrators understand. You already have these kinds of policies for your buildings and your physical collections. And then in the same sort of process, looking at existing policies and working with them to include your digitized or born digital content in those other policies. So here's an example. This is a small college archives has been digitizing and sharing materials from their collections for several years, but didn't have the resources to develop and implement a digital preservation program. They had a mission statement and a collection development policy for their archives, but neither of those things included any language about digital content, either digitized content or born digital. So without a policy to guide this work or raise awareness of their digital collections and their unique needs, the files, the actual content was at risk of being overlooked and not included in broader preservation efforts. And the library's administration didn't have that foundational knowledge to understand why this was important. Or something that was necessary to put resources towards. So in this example, the archives undertook a digital collections inventory to first document clearly what it was that they were wrangling, what was on the table as far as needs. And then they developed a digital preservation policy. And that included a one-page executive summary. So they shared the full policy with the library director. They didn't ask the director to read the full policy, which was several dozen pages long. So they gave them the information up front, but also demonstrated that they'd done their homework and thought through sort of the entire policy need. And this resulted in some increased awareness with administration of the need and risk. And then the digitized and born digital content started to get added to policy language as policies were reviewed and adopted. So another group of folks you might be talking to are content creators. So again, this includes anyone who might be sending digital content your way for possible preservation. And the idea here is to kind of help them help you. You want to set them up for success so that the work that they're doing now will be able to be preserved and accessed in the future. And you won't always have very much control over this stage, but in the best case scenario, you would. And the more that you can sort of do this work up front, the further you'll help your content contributors be on the road to success. So contributing to the project planning work as they start a project, you can guide their efforts by encouraging or sharing information about some digitization or preservation best practices. Be present to encourage basically being part of their workflow. So after they're done with their project, part of their sort of wind down of their project is to then deposit a copy of that digital content with you for preservation. Being available for consulting if it's feasible to answer some questions or provide some guidance in things like file formats, file naming, processes for depositing the content. And then if possible, doing some upfront outreach and education to help them understand that you are a resource for them, that you want to help protect the work and the time and the expertise that they're investing, and that's your role in your library or archives. So another example here, in this scenario, this is a small historical society that was working with a volunteer who had started to go out and collect stories from community members using her mobile phone. She was recording some audio oral history conversations as well as photos, and was really reaching some key community members and creating some unique content that didn't exist anywhere else. So it was really important work, but without basic metadata and file format standards and plans for managing the content, this content was all really at high risk of being lost or inaccessible in the future, and probably the not so distant future. So this is kind of an ongoing process. As we've said all along, this is always a process, and it evolves, but some activities that might help to sort of improve the work here would be to work closely with that volunteer to transition this project to something that's more fully supported by the institution. So the message here is not you're doing this wrong, but how can we help you protect this important work that you're doing? So if this is important content, maybe the institution invests in a professional recording device to capture this information, and it creates some workflows that will help inform file creation, describing the collection and the content, and managing it. And finally, my third stakeholder group is IT, and I know because you all are coming from a wide range of organizations, IT, if it exists at your organization, is going to be vastly different. But if you have IT resources to draw on, an important first step is to help them understand, maybe not your organization, but the work that you're doing, the content that you're working with, and the needs that you have. And to think about language. There are lots of words that IT staff uses, that archivists and heritage workers use, that they sound similar, but they mean different things. So kind of making sure each of you are on the same page and are understanding each other's terminology. While your priority is making sure your content is preserved and accessible forever, in the long term, IT staff focus is likely more on making the current data publicly accessible and systems running smoothly right now. So there's sort of a time frame difference that might be in consideration. And the earlier you can involve them in any sort of planning or project development, the better. And as soon as you have enough information about an upcoming project or a set of materials that need to be stored and preserved, it's the time to involve them in your planning. So for example, when you're having a grant, you would have this conversation not after you got the grant, but while you were developing the proposal so that you could work with them to set expectations and deliverables and determine costs. And this again is coming from Scott Prater's article, How to Talk to IT About Digital Preservation. We'll provide a link to this with our resource links, but this is a really useful article to consider if you're having these conversations. So, some closing thoughts. And these post-its all come from an exercise that we did with our CCDC participants. And they're all talking about kind of the idea that digital preservation is an active and ongoing process. Nothing has been preserved. Everything is in the process of being preserved. It's not one and done. You need a plan for sustaining that work, maintaining that digital preservation work. Or one way to put it, it's maybe a little dire, but it's true, there is no closure. And these comments are all paraphrasing the work of Trevor Owens, who's the head of digital content management for the Library of Congress. And I wanted to close by reading a quote from his 15 guiding axioms for digital preservation. And these come from his book, The Theory and Craft of Digital Preservation. So quoting Trevor, he says, preservation is the result of ongoing work of people and commitments of resources. The work is never finished. This is true of all forms of preservation. It's just that the timescales for digital preservation actions are significantly shorter than they tend to be with the conservation of things like books or oil paintings. Try to avoid talking about what has been preserved. There is only what we are preserving. All right, so we have about 10 minutes or so left in our session. We are happy to take questions through chat. I don't know if any particular ones came up while we've been presenting, but if you do have questions, please use the chat box to go ahead and share those, and we will take some answering of them. All right. I haven't seen any questions. Vicki, did you get any questions that I might have missed?
No, I didn't. Oh, yes. Lori asks, where can we find this recording? We will be making this recording available after the presentation. Emily, where will that be?
That will be on the WiLS website and also on the, it'll go out in an email to all the attendees.
And I see Julia has a question. What kind of professional recording devices do you suggest? Julia, are you asking about recording devices for oral history or storytelling gathering projects? Yeah, Emily, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what gets recommended a lot, and I know that the oral history program at UW-Madison has recommended Zoom recorders, which run about $100 to $200, I believe. We can look that up, but that's the brand name that comes to mind off the top of my head. All right, well, thank you all for joining us. Here are our email addresses. You're welcome to send us follow-up questions and look for an email with a link to the recording as well as our slides and our resources list. And yeah, thank you for joining us. Our next WiLSWorld short will be on November 8th, talking about developing diverse collections in libraries. And thanks again for joining us.
Thanks all.